My name is Caroline Whitfield. I am 41 years old, and on the night of March the 14th at exactly 8:53 in the evening, I stood in the center of the ballroom of the Harrington Grand Hotel in downtown Columbus, Ohio, holding a champagne flute I had not touched, while 217 people heard my husband's voice come through the speakers, telling his girlfriend that I was too stupid to notice. I did not drop the glass. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at him. I simply turned my head, very slowly, toward the sound system panel in the back corner of the room, gave the technician a single nod, and watched the rest of it play out the way you watch a fire you started on purpose. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, not my husband, not his girlfriend, not his colleagues in their rented tuxedos, not even my own mother-in-law who had spent 11 years calling me a sweet but simple woman, was that I had been preparing for that evening for exactly 9 months and 6 days. I had the recording, I had the attorney, I had the exit plan, I had a business registered in the state of Delaware that none of them knew existed. I had built it all in silence. This is that story. Her name was Melissa. That is the name on the nanny cam recording. He called her Mel. They had been together, based on the phone records I later obtained, for approximately 2 years and 4 months before that night. My husband's name is Douglas Whitfield. Doug to his friends. Douglas to me, after a certain point. He was 44 years old, senior vice president of regional sales at a logistics firm called Carver Dunn Group, and he believed, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been truly challenged, that he was the smartest person in every room he entered. We had been married for 13 years. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial on Briarwood Court in the Worthington suburb of Columbus, a house with a wraparound porch and a 2-car garage and a kitchen I had renovated myself in the spring of 2 years prior, picking out every tile, every fixture, every cabinet pole. And between managing our household, raising our 2 children, Lily, who was 10, and Sam, who was 8, and quietly, methodically running a freelance accounting practice that Douglas had always referred to as my little number hobby. He had a way of doing that, diminishing things. He did it without raising his voice, without ever being obviously cruel. It was a kind of artistry, the way he made small things out of large ones. He did it to my career first. When we met, I was 28 years old and working as a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in Cincinnati. He was 31, charming in the way that men are charming when they want something, and he told me on our 3rd date that I was the most quietly impressive person he had ever met. Quietly. I remember that word. I remember thinking it was a compliment. It took me years to understand that it was a condition he was placing on my impressiveness. That it had to remain quiet, that it could not exceed his own. 3 years into our marriage, when Lily was an infant and I was running on 5 hours of sleep and breastfeeding and conference calls, Douglas sat down across from me at the kitchen table and told me that it didn't really make sense for both of us to be working such demanding jobs. He used words like logistics and household stability. He never said what he meant, which was that my success made him uncomfortable. He said it would only be for a few years, just until the kids were in school full-time. I believed him. I want to be honest about that. I believed him because I wanted to, and because the alternative, understanding what he was actually doing, was too painful to sit with at 29 with a newborn on my chest. So I stepped back. I took on freelance clients, smaller work, things that could be done at the kitchen table after bedtime. I told myself it was temporary. And Douglas, free from the quiet competition of my professional life, flourished. He got the promotion to regional director when Lily was 3. He got the VP role when Sam started kindergarten. And each step up, he became a little more certain of the story he was telling himself. That he was the engine of this family. That I was the engine of this family. That I needed him more than he needed me. He had 2 expressions when I talked about money or business. One was a patient, slightly glazed look that meant he wasn't listening. The other was a kind of gentle correction, offered the way you correct a child who has made an endearing but incorrect statement. I'd mention a client, a rate increase, a tax strategy I'd found, and he'd say something like, "That's great, Care," and change the subject. I counted, over the course of the last 3 years of our marriage, 47 instances of being interrupted mid-sentence at dinner. Not once did he count mine. The second thing I need to tell you about Douglas is how he spoke about me when he thought I wasn't listening. I want to be careful here, because this is the part that matters. 2 years and 3 months before the night at the Harrington Grand, we had a small outdoor security system installed on our property. I arranged it myself, paid for it myself, managed it myself, because there had been a series of car break-ins on Briarwood Court and Douglas had waved it off as not worth the hassle. The system included 2 cameras on the exterior and one that I positioned inside the front hallway, and the small decorative shelf unit beside the coat closet. It was a commercial-grade nanny cam, disguised inside a book spine. I had read about the legal framework in Ohio. Recording in a common area of your own home, of conversations you are a party to or that occur in your presence, is permissible. I had done my research. I always did my research. Douglas just never noticed. The third thing you need to know is that Douglas started working from home on Fridays about 18 months before the party. I know now that this was not entirely voluntary. Carver Den had a flexible Friday policy, but it also conveniently allowed him to have phone calls in the kitchen while I was doing school pickup, while I was at the grocery store, while I was at Lily's piano lesson. He treated the house on Friday afternoons the way men treat hotel rooms, as private space, consequence-free. It was on a Friday in late June, specifically the 22nd at 3:47 in the afternoon, that I pulled up the hallway cam footage from my phone in the school parking lot and heard him say it for the first time. He was on the phone with Melissa. I know it was Melissa because he said her name twice, and because the phone records confirmed it later. He was standing in our front hallway, leaning against the wall beside the shelf where the camera was, and he was laughing. He said, "She asked me last night if I thought she should go back to full-time work." He paused. I told her to think about it. Another pause. More laughter. Then, "She won't. She's too deep in the routine. She's comfortable." And then, the line that I replayed 41 times in the days that followed. "Mel, honestly, she's too stupid to notice anything that doesn't happen in this kitchen." I sat in the school parking lot. The car was running. The air conditioning was on. Outside the window, another mother was waving at me. I lifted my hand and waved back. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. And then I started making decisions. The first thing I did was nothing. I want you to understand that clearly. For 2 weeks after that day in the parking lot, I did absolutely nothing that deviated from the ordinary. I made dinner. I attended Sam's baseball games. I went to the farmer's market on Sunday mornings. I smiled at Douglas over my coffee cup. I was present, warm, and entirely unreadable. I had made a decision not to react, and that decision was the first brick and something I was beginning to construct, though I didn't yet have full blueprints. The second thing I did was call my college roommate Priya Vasquez, who had gone on to become a family law attorney in Columbus. I did not call her from my cell phone. I drove to a coffee shop on North High Street, purchased a prepaid phone with cash, and called her from there on a Thursday morning when Douglas was in the office. I told her what I had heard. I told her about the recording. I told her I was thinking. She told me to stop thinking and start documenting. She also told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Caroline, the biggest mistake betrayed spouses make is that they move too fast. They blow it up before they've secured the landing." I began documenting that same day. Over the following 6 weeks, I cataloged every financial account I could access. We had a joint checking account with approximately $18,000, a joint savings account with $31,000, Douglas's 401k through Carver Dunn, to which I had beneficiary access, 2 investment accounts, one joint, one in his name, and a home valued at that time at approximately $620,000 with a mortgage balance of just over $200,000. I photographed every statement. I noted every account number. I made 3 copies. One kept at Priya's office, one in a fireproof lockbox I stored in the basement behind the holiday decorations, and one I emailed to an account Douglas did not know existed, under a name I had created 2 years earlier for a small freelance LLC I'd registered but never activated. That LLC was called Whitmore Advisory Group. I had registered it in Delaware in February of the previous year, partially on instinct, partially because a client of mine, a woman who ran a boutique e-commerce business, had told me over coffee that every woman should have a separate legal entity. I had filed it away in the back of my mind, the way women file away information they don't yet know they'll need. I activated it in July, opened a business bank account in its name, and began migrating my freelance income into it quietly over 6 weeks, adjusting my invoicing, routing directly to the new account. Douglas had never shown a meaningful interest in where my freelance income went. He assumed it went to household expenses, which it did, partially, and then less so. By August the 15th, I had $43,000 in the Whitmore Advisory account, not stolen, earned. Every dollar from my own clients, but documented, sequestered, and safe. I continued collecting footage. Douglas used the hallway, the kitchen, and the living room for his Friday calls, rotating somewhat unpredictably, but the kitchen camera I added in August, disguised inside a small succulent planter on the open shelving above the island, caught him on 3 more occasions. One call was innocuous, mostly logistics about a weekend Douglas was planning for Melissa in Pittsburgh the following October that he had told me was a work conference. I have the flight records. One call was shorter and harder to hear, and one call, recorded on a Tuesday evening in September, when I had ostensibly gone to bed early with a headache, which I had not, was the one I ended up using at the party. That recording was 9 minutes and 40 seconds long. In it, Douglas was sitting at the kitchen island. He poured himself a glass of scotch at approximately 9:17. Melissa was on speakerphone, which I believe was a habit he developed from overconfidence. He told her about his upcoming promotion, the Carver-Dunn regional reorganization that would elevate him to Senior VP of National Accounts, with a corresponding salary increase and a formal celebration the company was planning for mid-March. He told her he wished she could come. She said she wished that too. Then she asked him, and I want to quote this exactly because it is important, she said, "What does Caroline think about all of this?" He laughed. And he said, "She thinks it's wonderful. She thinks she understands what I do. She has no idea how any of it works. I could tell her anything." Another laugh from both of them. Then he said, "Word for word, Mel. She's too stupid to notice. She's always been too stupid to notice. That's why it works." That sentence, 9 words, I listened to them 38 times in the days that followed, not because they hurt me, though they did, but because I needed them to stop hurting me and start being data. I am a numbers person. I needed to convert the feeling into a fact, and a fact into a plan. If you are still watching this story, if it's reaching something in you that you haven't let yourself name yet, I want you to drop a comment below and tell me one word. What is the thing you are building in silence right now? You don't have to explain it. Just one word. And if this channel has ever made you feel seen, please subscribe, because every single story here is for someone who needed to hear it, and that someone might be the person who finds it next. Priya and I met in October to review everything. I spread the documentation across her conference table, the bank records, the account numbers, the LLC registration, the nanny cam footage on a tablet, the phone records I had obtained through a licensed private investigator named Stuart Mead, whom Priya had recommended and who charged me $2,400 for 6 weeks of verified records. Stuart was methodical and discreet. He delivered his findings in a sealed binder that I kept in the lockbox with the financial records. Priya reviewed everything for 2 hours. When she finished, she looked at me across the table and said, "You've done more than most people do in 2 years of litigation." She told me I had strong grounds for fault-based divorce in Ohio, which recognizes adultery as a factor in asset distribution. She told me that the documentation of my freelance income, properly filed and reported, was unimpeachable. She told me the Whitmore advisory account was legitimate and that Douglas would have no claim to it, and she told me about the promotion party. Douglas had told me about it in September. It was to be held at the Harrington Grand Hotel on the evening of March the 14th. 217 people, he'd said, colleagues, senior leadership from the Chicago office, clients, board members, 2 local city council members. The company was paying for everything. There would be a dinner, speeches, a formal presentation of his new title and responsibilities. He was the guest of honor. I said I was so proud of him. I smiled over the dinner table. I helped him pick his suit. In November, I enrolled in a 12-week digital marketing and brand strategy course through an online program I had been considering for 2 years. I completed it on a schedule of 4 hours per week during the children's school hours, at a coffee shop on Saturdays when Douglas went to the gym. I was formalizing what I already knew, that I could build a real business, that the freelance accounting work was the foundation of something much larger if I gave it structure, intention, and scale. By January, Whitmore Advisory had 3 new business clients, a properly designed website I had built myself over 6 weekends, and a revenue run rate that Priya confirmed was, when annualized, 41% higher than it had been under my previous informal arrangement. In February, I had a conversation with Douglas's mother, Patricia Whitfield, who had never been particularly warm to me, but who called every Sunday. During one of those calls, she said, unprompted, "I do hope you'll look your best at Douglas's party, Caroline. You know how important appearances are in these circles." I told her I had already chosen my dress. It was a deep midnight blue, structured, elegant, the kind of dress that makes people look twice without understanding why. I had bought it in November. I had known, even then, that I would not be arriving at that party as the woman they all expected. In early March, I met with Priya one final time. We reviewed the divorce petition she had already prepared. I reviewed and signed it. I gave her 2 envelopes. The first contained a letter addressed to Douglas. The second contained the financial disclosure documents that Ohio requires in a divorce filing. Both were dated and sealed. She would file the petition and have him serve the following Monday, March the 17th, 3 days after the party. I wanted him to have that night. I wanted him to have the whole night first. We also discussed the recording. I had given Priya a copy of the nanny cam footage in October. She had reviewed it with a digital forensics consultant she trusted. The recording was legally obtained under Ohio law. It was authentic, unaltered, and admissible. What I did with it personally, in a non-legal context, was my own decision. I had made that decision in November, and I had not second-guessed it once. The last piece I needed was technical. I spent 2 evenings in the first week of March watching tutorial videos about Bluetooth audio adapters and auxiliary input systems. I called the Harrington Grand's events coordination team, introduced myself as Mrs. Douglas Whitfield, and asked several very natural-sounding questions about the sound system in the banquet hall. I learned that the room used a Yamaha commercial mixer fed by a Bluetooth-capable hub that the venue's AV technician managed from a panel near the service entrance. I learned the technician's name was Gerald. I learned that the evening's program included a welcome address, dinner service, and a 15-minute presentation of Douglas's new role that would include a short video reel from the company's media team. The video reel would play through the same sound system. I arrived at the Harrington Grand at 6:15 on the evening of March the 14th, 45 minutes before the guests. I was wearing the midnight blue dress. I had a small clutch. Inside the clutch was my phone, my lick stick, and a USB drive. I found Gerald near the service entrance. I introduced myself as the guest of honor's wife. I told him that Douglas's family had a short audio tribute they wanted to play, following the company video. A surprise from the family, I said, very heartfelt. He didn't know about it. Gerald was kind and accommodating. I showed him the USB drive. He plugged it into the hub, confirmed it loaded, and told me all I'd need to do was give him a signal. I told him I'd give him a nod from across the room. He said that was no problem at all. By 7 o'clock, the room was filling. Douglas arrived at 7:14, already flushed with excitement, already working the room with both hands outstretched. He saw me near the bar, came over, squeezed my shoulder, said, "You look great, Care," and moved on. Patricia Whitfield found me at 7:30 and told me the centerpieces were lovely, as though I had arranged them. I thanked her. I watched Douglas for the entire evening. I watched him with his colleagues, his superiors, his clients. I watched the version of himself he performed in these rooms. The confident, magnetic, decisive leader. I had spent 13 years quietly sustaining the infrastructure that allowed him to perform that version of himself without friction. I had managed the house, the children, the schedules, the invisible 1,000 decisions that free a person to move through the world as though the world simply arranges itself. And I had done it, for most of those years, with genuine care, because I had believed in us. It is important to say that. It is important not to rewrite the past into something simpler than it was. But that night, watching him shake hands and receive congratulations, I felt something I had not expected. Clarity. Not anger. Not grief. Clarity the way the air feels after rain. The program began at 8:30. There were 2 speeches from senior leadership. There was a video reel, 3 minutes and 20 seconds of polished corporate production. The room applauded. Douglas stood at the front, accepting it all with practiced modesty. And then, the MC, a pleasant man named Richard from the Chicago office, said, "And finally, we know Douglas's family has a small surprise for him." I was standing near the bar, approximately 30 feet from Douglas. I turned my head toward the back of the room, toward Gerald at the panel, and I gave him a single nod. The speakers opened. The first 3 seconds were ambient, a slight hiss as the file loaded. Then Douglas's voice filled the room, clear and unhurried, unmistakable. "She thinks it's wonderful. She thinks she understands what I do. She has no idea how any of it works. I could tell her anything." A pause. A laugh. And then, "Mel, she's too stupid to notice. She's always been too stupid to notice. That's why it works." The room went very quiet. Not silent the way a room goes silent when something is wrong. Silent the way a room goes silent when something has just become undeniable and everyone is deciding what to do with their face. I stood at the bar. I did not move. I held my champagne flute, still full, never touched, with both hands in front of me. I looked at Douglas. He had turned from the podium. The color had left his face in a single movement, the way water leaves a glass when you tip it. His mouth opened. He looked at me. I met his eyes. I gave him nothing. No tears. No expression. I just looked at him the way you look at something you have already finished grieving. Patricia Whitfield made a sound to my left. A kind of involuntary exhale, halfway between a gasp and a word she didn't complete. Richard from Chicago had stepped back from the microphone. 2 women near the front, wives of colleagues I had spoken to at events like this for a decade, turned toward each other without a word. A man near the bar said very quietly, "Oh my God." The company's chief operating officer, a tall woman named Diane Okafor, who had been seated at the head table, rose slowly from her chair and did not sit back down. The recording ran for 47 more seconds. I had edited it to include only what mattered. At the end, it cut. Gerald removed the USB from the hub. The speakers returned to ambient silence. Douglas said my name. "Caroline." His voice was thin. I set the champagne flute on the bar behind me, gently, and picked up my coat from the chair where I had placed it at 7:30, because I had known where I would be standing at the end of the evening. I said, "Congratulations on your promotion, Douglas." I said it the way you say something you mean. Quietly, clearly, and without decoration. Then, I walked out of the Harrington Grand Hotel, through the lobby, through the revolving door, into the cold March air, where my car was valeted at the front and waiting exactly where I had arranged it to be. I drove to my mother's house where Lily and Sam were sleeping, and I sat on the edge of Lily's bed in the dark for a long time. She was on her side, one arm curled under the pillow the way she'd slept since she was a baby. I didn't wake her. I just sat there. In the days that followed, the world reorganized itself in the way things reorganize after a rupture. Douglas came home the night of the party, and I was not there. He left 11 voicemails, each one different. The first confused, the second pleading, the third beginning the architecture of an excuse. I listened to all of them. I did not call back. He was served with the divorce petition the following Monday, March the 17th, at 11:22 in the morning, at his office at Carver Dunn Group. I know the exact time because Priya's process server was professional and kept records. I also know, through a source I will not name, that Diane Okafor had already requested a private meeting with Douglas's direct supervisor the previous Friday, and that the conversation concerned the culture of leadership that Carver Dunn wished to represent publicly. Douglas appeared at my mother's house on the Wednesday evening. He rang the doorbell. I answered the door. He looked like a man who had not slept in 4 days, which he had not. He said, "Can we talk?" I said yes. We sat in my mother's living room. He said he was sorry. He said it multiple times, in multiple formulations. Sorry for the affair, sorry for what he'd said, sorry for who he'd been. He said, "I don't actually think those things about you, Caroline. I was performing. I was being someone I'm not when I talked to her." I listened to all of it. When he was finished, I said, "I believe that you believe that." And then I said, "But the version of you that performs for her is also you. And the version that diminished me for 13 years is also you. I am not interested in which version is the real one." His mother called me on the Thursday. Patricia Whitfield, who had spent 11 years calling me sweet but simple, called me to tell me that I had humiliated her son and that what I had done was vindictive and wrong. I let her finish. Then I said, "Patricia, he described me as too stupid to notice in front of witnesses to a woman he had been seeing for 2 years. I let him hear what that sounds like." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a different voice, a quieter one, "I didn't know it had gone that far." And I believed her. I said, "I know. I'm sorry for what you're going through." And I meant it. The divorce took 9 months. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, and Priya was thorough. The fault-finding, adultery documented and substantiated, influenced the court's view of asset division. I kept the house. Douglas's 401k was split. The investment accounts were split. Whitmore Advisory Group was not a marital asset. It was registered in Delaware, funded entirely from my independent income, and had no legal connection to our marital finances. The judge was not particularly interested in Douglas's argument to the contrary. I kept the business. By the time the divorce was finalized, Whitmore Advisory had 7 business clients and was on track to gross $412,000 in its first full fiscal year. I had hired a part-time associate. I was working from a small office I rented on the 2nd floor of a building on 5th Avenue in Columbus, with large windows and a view of the park. On the first morning I sat in that office, my desk, my chair, my name on the door. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that too. Triumph would have meant I wanted this. I did not want this. I wanted the marriage I thought I had at 29, with the man I thought I had married. I grieved that for a long time, quietly, in ways I won't perform for you here. What I felt that morning in the office was something steadier than triumph. It was the particular satisfaction of a person who has discovered that she was never as limited as she was told. There is something they don't tell you about being underestimated. They don't tell you that the underestimation itself becomes a kind of tool, if you are patient enough. When someone believes you are not watching, they show you everything. When someone believes you are not capable, they stop monitoring the spaces where you are building. Douglas's certainty that I was too stupid to notice was the very thing that gave me the room to prepare everything I needed. His confidence was my cover. His dismissal was my privacy. I think about the women who are watching this right now, and I know some of you are, who are sitting inside a version of what I was sitting inside, who have been told, in words or in silences, that their understanding is limited, that their contribution is peripheral, that they are supported rather than capable of supporting themselves. I want to say something to you that is not a speech and not advice, because I am not qualified to give you advice about your life. I just want to say, the thing you are building in silence is real. even if it is small right now. Even if it is just a thought, just a course you enrolled in, just an account you opened, just a question you asked a lawyer over the phone, it is real, and it is yours, and it is enough to begin. I have not spoken to Douglas in several months. He has moved into an apartment in the Short North neighborhood. He sees Lily and Sam on a schedule we agreed to in mediation, alternating weekends and Wednesday evenings. The children are adjusting with the remarkable resilience that children show when the adults in their lives stop pretending and start being honest. Lily asked me, about 2 months after everything, whether I was sad. I told her I had been, and that I was less sad now. She thought about that for a moment, in the particular way she has of processing information. Then she said, "Good. Just that. Good. I have been asked, by people who know the story, whether I regret doing it the way I did, the party, the recording, the public nature of it. I have sat with that question for a long time. I think the honest answer is, I don't regret the recording playing, but I sometimes wonder about the witnesses, about the collateral exposure, about whether there was a version of this that was more private. And then I remember the exact words. Too stupid to notice. Said out loud. Said laughing. Said with the ease of someone who has never once considered being held accountable. And I think about all the dinners, all the interruptions, all the small corrections offered with a patient, glazed smile. And I think he chose to say it in a room. I just chose which room. The loudest comebacks are built in silence. That is something I believe now, with the kind of certainty that comes from having lived it rather than read it. The silence is not passivity. The silence is preparation. The silence is the thing that allows you to see clearly, to document carefully, to build deliberately, while the person who underestimates you continues to perform their version of events, confident that the audience never changes. He was wrong about the audience. He was wrong about what I noticed. He was wrong about what I understood. He was wrong about almost everything, except one thing. I was quiet. I was deeply, intentionally quiet, but that was never stupidity. That was always strategy. If you have ever been in a room where someone who is supposed to love you described you as not enough, not smart enough, not smart enough, not worth paying attention to, I want to ask you this. What do they not know that you are building right now? Drop it in the comments. Not the details, just the word. I'll be reading them. To everyone who has been watching this channel and sending messages and showing up for these stories, thank you does not cover it, but thank you is what I have. You have spent your time in this space, and that means something real to me and to everyone here at Revenge Chronicles. When you share these stories, you reach women who need them. When you comment, you build something together. When you subscribe, you make it possible to keep doing this work. Every episode we release is made with care, and it is made for you. We see your messages. We read your comments. We know you are out there, and we will keep showing up as long as you do. Stay with us.